All right, everybody, we have another special guest today. Matt Green. He's the CRO of Sales Assembly. Many of you follow him already on LinkedIn, so I'm excited to have him here. We're going to talk about something that we haven't yet covered really on our episode or on our podcast is relationship-based selling, and I think everyone has a different definition of what that means. And so I'm curious. I want to start off this topic by first asking Matt to define what he thinks relationship-based selling means. And then, as you all know how I like to go, very tactical. And so Matt will share some tactics on that. So how would you define it? Number one, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
And number two, how would you define relationship-based selling?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I look at this, through the lens of having two sort of different definitions, relationship-based selling at a very high level, exactly how it sounds, right? Really investing and focusing on building some sort of authentic personal-to-personal relationship with a prospect in order to effect a sale. There is another angle of it, something that I have a good amount of direct experience with building Sales Assembly, helping to build Sales Assembly over the past 6 years, which is building relationships mainly for the sole purpose of extracting new relationships in the form of referrals from those existing relationships that we've already built. That has been a big part of what has made Sales Assembly, our organization, successful over the past 6 years.
So it's interesting. You said something there when you were building Sales Assembly. And for those listening, like it's much harder. I was telling this to Matt. It's much harder to generate leads and build a community, etc., product service when you have no funding behind you, when you are essentially making fire from scratch. That's why I love this particular topic. You said your goal was to build relationships to create new relationships, where I think a lot of folks think of building relationships so they can close that relationship. You're saying, no, let's build that relationship and then that will form another relationship and that other relationship will close or breed another relationship. That's interesting.
Yeah, and to be clear, while at the same time not ignoring the opportunity to close that first touch point of a relationship, but not looking at that as only the ideal end result, right? Taking more of a longer lens, a longer term view of like, okay, what could this relationship turn into outside of just one closed one opportunity? Right? How do we make sure that we're planting the seeds from the very beginning in order to generate maybe 3 or 4 closed one opportunities from this one initial relationship?
How long does it take you? And I know it's a tough question to answer because it really depends. But on average, if like let's just say you identify someone, well, how would you identify? Let's start with there. How would you identify? Let's say you're starting from scratch again. You're starting Sales Assembly from scratch or whatever it is. How would you go about identifying who to build a relationship with first?
Yeah, in many cases, it's really not going to deviate too much from, someone who is starting any other type of a business, be it a software business or a services business, is going to an individual where you think there might be a need, right? Just call it what it is, a prospect, someone who you believe, hey, this product or service that we're building from scratch, from the ground up, I have high confidence that the problem that we're solving is going to resonate extremely well with this person, because just like any other relationship, if you're looking to an effective sales, step one is turning this person into some sort of champion, right? So really that's how I would enter this conversation, saying like, okay, well, let's make sure that we're going after what we could clearly agree is our sort of ICP, to use the industry
Yeah.
lingo.
All right. So you identify your ICP, and then you're clear. If it's relationship based, then you're not going straight for the, hey, notice you're hiring, thought we can build, here's a solution that we have. How do you approach the relationship?
Yeah, I always like to start from adding a standpoint of value in some way, shape, or form. And that's something that we have done from the very beginning. Again, when Sales Assembly, was essentially nothing, the value that we could bring at that time was the relatively meager but still meaningful network that we had built, right? So again, just to speak plainly, we sell the VPs of sales and CROs at the very beginning when we didn't necessarily have a clearly defined product or service to sell to them. A big part of the value that we brought to the table was, hey, we have this network of VPs of sales and CROs that you might want to connect with, and you might want to connect with them for the purposes of just networking and exchanging ideas and best practices, or hey, two sales professionals, You might want to connect with them because their company happens to be a prospect, right, for the product or service that your company sells. So we would always start the relationship, and to an extent, even to this day, 6 years later, we do start the relationships in that way by leveraging some sort of value that we think we're going to be able to bring to the table.
And would this be through a cold call or a straight up LinkedIn DM or cold email?
Yeah, so we haven't had a whole lot of success with cold outreach. We've tried it off and on over the past couple of years, hasn't really been our jam. What has been our jam is going back to the point at the top of the call is leveraging some existing relationships that we have in order to generate referrals. So we do, again, even to this day, 6 years later, we do very minimal, if any, cold outreach
Wow.
whatsoever. And everything is still just based on people that we know, providing value to them in some way, shape, or form, whether they're a client or not of Sales Assembly. But we've been able to develop sort of a good recipe of turning even non-clients into champions of ours, so that when we go and we notice that they're connected to our ICP, to another potential buyer on LinkedIn, it's going to be relatively easy for us to ask for an introduction and receive it.
Interesting. So no cold outreach, but you're leveraging the existing relationship. So how would that look like? I mean, you would reach out to somebody you know and say, "Hey, long time no speak. I have a bunch of VPs or CROs that you want to chat with." Like, what would that look like?
Yeah, what that would look like. So first and foremost, I mean, going to the champion, someone who we're going to ask for a referral. Again, this is going to be after we've reached a point where we've developed enough credibility with him or her, right? And again, whether they're a client or not, where we've just built a good enough relationship, again, usually by adding some sort of value and investing in the relationship. When it comes point to asking for the referral, we tend to make it a really simple process for the person who is going to make the introduction to us. So just to walk through the process from front to back, because we do think it's relatively frictionless. If we were going to ask you for an introduction to someone who we saw that you were connected with on LinkedIn, we would say, "Hey, Moore, by the way, notice you're connected to this or that person. We'd love an introduction to them for this, that, or the other reason." Right. And we'd be perfectly candid. We'd be saying like, "Hey, in an ideal world, we'd like to be able to sell this person on becoming a member of Sales Assembly." If I were to write you an email that contains all the context that you need that is addressed to the other person, would you be willing to just click forward and say, "Hey, see below, are you open to an introduction to Matt?" Right. And 9 times out of 10, people in our network, they're going to opt into doing that. Right. So what we do from there is we craft, again, a really simple and straightforward email that, again, is going to lead with value. Right. We notice that this person is the VP of sales or CRO of this type of company. Hey, we know a lot of companies that could be prospects for them. Happy to make introductions there if they're looking to break into some accounts where maybe we have relationships. We're going to be able to affect that. But again, in that email, we are transparent. Sure, we'd love to have a conversation with him or her about their organization joining Sales Assembly. But even if that's not of interest, we're always looking to make good connections and seeing how we could bring value to other VP or C-level revenue leaders in the B2B tech space, right? Following that approach, I'd say 8 out of every 10 introductions that we ask for, we do tend to receive.
Have you heard of co-sell?
Yeah. We actually coincidentally just started implementing it late last week here at Sales Assembly.
Yeah, I'm part of their beta also. It's interesting. So for those that don't know what co-sell is, it's essentially an extension that lives on LinkedIn where it makes like your mutual connection. You can if there's someone you want to introduce to somebody else or you want to get introduced on LinkedIn, it shows you the mutual friends and then it makes it really easy to ask for a referral. Basically what Matt was saying, co-sell can help with. Um,
Yeah.
Now, so you said you weren't doing outreach, but for those that I think there are, I mean, a good chunk of account executives, even founders that are doing outreach, they're like, okay, yeah, I need to do outreach to generate leads. I want to go the relationship based way. Step one would be what? Look at their network and see who they know that is connected with this person. Would you say it's worth asking for an introduction from a mutual connection, even if they don't have a strong relationship with, or only the ones that they've had a pretty strong relationship that they know the value that they can bring and vice versa?
Yeah, I to answer your question, yes, I definitely would recommend asking for an introduction for a couple reasons. Now, number one, I understand that when you compare it to just pure cold outreach, it's probably going to take a little bit, or in some cases, significantly more time
Yep.
in order to go through the sales motion. So it is a time investment, right? But at the end of the day, if you are able to get an introduction via referral from a mutual connection, I forget exactly what the stats are, but I believe that and again, I could follow up with you and share some of these data after this conversation, but lifetime value of a client that's received via referral is usually 17% higher than one that isn't. And I believe it's referrals or prospects that enter a sales cycle via referral tend to close around 60 to 70% faster, right, than any other prospect that you might get in touch with. So again, while it is going to be a time investment, and let's be honest, you are also leveraging some of your social capital and asking other people in your network to leverage their social capital in order to affect referrals, which I understand shouldn't be ignored. When you take a look at the fact that, hey, these are likely going to be much better clients and the sales cycle is going to go a hell of a lot quicker than acquiring a prospect or any other channel, our calculations that it does tend to be worth the investment up front.
Interesting. How long? You're saying that it requires a little bit more time, and it makes sense, right? Because you have to reach out to the relationship, then follow up with them to follow up with the person. How long, on average, have you seen it from the first touch point that you've done with, at least in your experience, with a mutual connection that you want a referral to the time you actually get connected and start this new relationship with, call it your ICP?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's all across the board. And again, um, I wouldn't take this as gospel because again, our whole business over the past 6, 7 years has been built off this. But we can point to a lot of situations where we ask for a referral and we'll probably have it in our inbox within 24 hours, right? But I'd say by and large, realistically, usually takes maybe about a week or so turnaround time.
That's
Again,
pretty quick.
yeah, it is relatively quick, but again, one of the things when you go back to the entire concept of relationship-based selling, what that means to us here at Sales Assembly is not treating relationships as transactions, right? These are things that you have to continue investing in order to just maintain the strength of the relationship over a long period of time, right? You mentioned something offhand earlier on in the conversation when asking for referral, the theoretical language of like, hey, it's been a long time since we chatted. Like that right there is a red flag to us, right? If we're going to be asking somebody for referrals, it can't be a long time since we chatted, right? So, there have to be other touch points that go along throughout the life cycle of you and the relationship with this person in order to make sure that, again, that the sales cycle, so to speak, as far as just acquiring these types of introductions, is going to be much more streamlined and frictionless.
So you're saying um if the, let's say, a person has to say something like that, it's been a while, that's a red flag, and so to prevent that, or to not take that called move, they would have to. You'd recommend, your recommendation is to add a little bit more communication before you even ask for the referral. Whether it's like, hey, by the way, I loved your post on LinkedIn. That really resonated with me. That's touch point one. A week later, engage with them again. And a week later, engage with them again, let's just say. And then at one point, plan your attack and then ask for a referral.
Exactly. I mean, very similar to other types of social selling best practices where you don't want to just come out of the blue. But let's also keep in mind, or I should say, let's not ignore just other basic opportunities. LinkedIn is going to notify you when it's somebody's birthday, right? Send them an email wishing them happy birthday. Don't do the automated LinkedIn DM
Oh,
because
I
that
can't
gets
stand it.
lost in the noise. Exactly, right? Work anniversary, send them an email. This is where, and again, I understand that it's a little bit of behavioral change. It's really critical for sellers to leverage their CRM to the fullest extent possible, where you do keep detailed notes around the person as an individual, as a human, right? Are they married, unmarried? Do they have kids, right? What are their kids interested in? When was the last time that they traveled and where they traveled to? Right. If you're looking to build long-term relationships with people that you can capitalize on in order to form new relationships, again, you have to make some investments in time or some investments of time into building and fostering that relationship. And a lot of that is going to come down to some, just basic components that you and I, how we would normally treat our friends, right? Such
Yeah.
as wishing them a happy birthday or checking like, hey, how's your son? How's your daughter doing? Oh, you mentioned that you went to, Mexico 3 months ago. Remind me, how was that trip? Where are you traveling to next? So small touch points like that throughout the year, that's going to build a good foundation for, again, you to make sure that you're going to be able to capitalize to an extent on the relationship that you formed.
Yeah, there are three things that as you're saying that one was a question, two was sort of like an observation. I'll start with observation. Well, I'll start with the question because I think it's an important question. Um, let's say someone is going after an ICP and they see, we'll use you as an example. They see that they have a mutual connection with that ICP with you. They're connected with you, and they're like, I haven't really chatted with Matt, and so I'm not going to go straight for the jugular. I'm going to do those touch points. I'm gonna say, hey Matt, love your post. Hey Matt, how was Mexico? Blah blah blah. After how many touches would you say it would be appropriate and non-transactional for the rep or that person to be like, hey, by the way, Matt, I saw that you're connected with this person because it all, and I've seen it happen with me where someone's like connecting with me on LinkedIn, they'll DM me, we'll
Yeah.
try to build a relationship. It's all bullshit. Then they go for the ask like after the third attempt. I'm like, this was so planned and not authentic.
Yeah. That's why I started smiling a moment ago because we have to understand that there's a difference between it not being transactional and it appearing to not be transactional.
Right.
Right. And I wish that I had some really well thought out algorithm or formula for that. It's really going to be case by case. If they are unlucky enough to run into a cynical person like you or I, it's going to be like, okay, well, we kind of know what you're doing here. But by and large, I'd say, and again, this is just off the top of my head, you give it a good month, 2 months worth of engagement, right? 3 or 4 touch points, check an email, things like that. Because think about it. I mean, again, even for people as cynical as us, if we got to check an email today, like, hey, more, how are your kids doing? And then, 3 weeks from now, they engage on your LinkedIn post, 2 weeks after that, like, hey, really great post. I noticed this really resonated with me. And then 2, 3 weeks after that, they said, hey, more, by the way, notice you're connected with this person. Sure. In the back of your mind, you might be like, okay, if I'm tracing the steps back, I kind of knew what you were doing. But at the same time, you'd probably still be like, yeah, sure, I'll be open to it.
I think as I'm thinking about it, if someone did it to me, if they added a PS, let's say they had like a non-sales related touch point, maybe they're complimenting me on a podcast or on our podcast, whatever it is, and then they added a PS or a by the way, I think that would make it less transactional. It's like, hey, I loved your podcast with Matt. I think his tactics are really good. PS, if you're ever open to it, I know you're connected with blah blah blah. Like I think that would be a little
Yeah.
bit more. I'd be okay with it. I'll tell you something that I've done that worked well, but it wasn't going for the relationship. It was more so going directly to the ICP using a form of we'll call it RBS, relationship based selling.
Mm.
It was I identified my ICP. I engaged with their posts more or less, like commented, liked, etc. for like maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and then I sent them a cold email saying, we'll use you as an example. Subject line, it's more from LI, and then I would start the email saying, hey Matt, it's more from LinkedIn. We've loosely engaged with each other's posts. And then I just go straight for what I'm essentially asking for. And that's worked pretty well for me. But that's interesting. 1 to 2 months. Yeah, that's the long game. Yeah, that's what you're saying. There was
Yeah.
a long game. And then
And I'd say,
yeah,
yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I love the PS idea. I think people undervalue just the idea of asking for permission, right? So using your example, like, hey, more love your post. Hey, PS, just took this new role, just launched this new company, whatever it is. Hey, we actually sell into a lot of people. Looks like you're connected to. Would you mind if over the next month or two, I took a quick scan through your LinkedIn connections and maybe identified 1 or 2 people that I'd like introductions to? And if you don't know them, you're not comfortable, totally cool. But would you mind if I did that? Right. So not necessarily
mm,
asking for the referral, but again, asking for permission to ask for the referral down the road. That would go a long way, I think, towards softening that blow.
yeah, the asking for permission is something that I'm leaning into a lot more now. Even in we'll just talk about like discovery for a quick second.
Yeah.
Even if I'm on a discovery call and I want to ask a really like tough, blunt question, I may not ask it bluntly. I may say something like, I have a really blunt question to ask you. Can I ask you? And feel free to kick me in the teeth if it's a no. And I ask permission, sort of set it up that way, and they always say, yeah, yeah, absolutely, and they never kick me in the teeth. Um, but and then the two other thoughts that came into my head as you're talking about, it's like because the relationship based selling requires a lot more investment in time, and it is an extremely strategic move. Number one, it only makes sense to work on that with like call it enterprise type of deals, not SMB or even mid market. Um, maybe even if you're in a partnerships department, then it makes sense
Yeah.
too. And then the other thing that I personally haven't done well enough is tracking it in a CRM versus just having the DM sort of marked red in your LinkedIn inbox.
Yeah. Yeah. Tracking it. If this is going to be a big part of people's approach, which I think that it should be, especially now when the general consensus is like, hey, cold outbounds really ain't working, right? Or at least anywhere near the extent that it was 12 months ago. You have to start making these time investments now. And one of those time investments is keeping the CRM up to date, right? So that you could keep organized on this stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, totally different conversation, but I mean, I imagine the challenge for let's say if it's an SDR, AE, or whatever it is, even a VP of sales that wants to start implementing this, maybe their CRO or CEO is saying, well, like you have a quota to hit by the end of the quarter, and going the relationship based selling method will take longer to essentially build that relationship and then attract those leads. So um, they're thinking like, damn, I want to do this, but it's too long term. I need the short term activity now so I can hit
Yeah.
quota. But anyway, that's another conversation. Yeah, we're at time. But is there anything you want to leave anyone off with? If not, feel free to plug yourself in at this time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I would just say, and again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. It is worth the time investment. To your last point, doesn't have to be the entire strategy. I'm not suggesting that if you haven't done this before, it's like, great, let's rip everything out and
Yep.
replace it with just this. But again, start making those small incremental investments in time now. They will pay dividends down the road. If anyone's interested in connecting with me, you could connect with me on LinkedIn, salesassembly.com. We provide all the skill development and training for the go-to-market teams of around 200 B2B tech companies today. That's our brief commercial.
Sweet. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the time.